One thing that I've seen in my journey, in my own personal fitness journey, but also in the fitness journey of many other people, is that we tend to hit a rock bottom, an unexpected life change. It could be a job change, a relationship ending. I know in my case, it was family deaths, things like that, family tragedies that often set off a certain switch. They turn on a certain switch in us, and we decide to turn to fitness and nutrition, turn to health, and just improving ourselves when those, big life moments happen. And it's super common. And sometimes when you're down there and maybe you had been flirting with the idea of starting to work out, eat different, just take care of yourself in a much better manner. Maybe you've been flirting with that idea for a while, and then all of a sudden you get hit with that family tragedy, that breakup, and you finally change for better. So like I mentioned, for me, I was a teenager when I first started, getting hit with family tragedies, just deaths, a lot of definitely premature deaths, a lot of young people. I haven't buried too many elder family members. That definitely lit a fire in my belly to, get my house in order. And because, it's really painful to just all of a sudden, you're 17, you're riding cloud nine, you're riding high, and, you lose a close family member and you're devastated. But that was also something that ended up catapulting me and, giving me the energy and the motivation to then work on what I had to work on. But there was a delay. There was about a year or so of, a difficult delay in me getting my act together, because I was grieving and I was learning how to grieve for the first time in my life. And one of the coping mechanisms that I used was eating food, and definitely overeating. And I went a long time just, overeating, and always looking for, whether it was chips, another slice of pizza, soda, whatever it was, to, I guess, quote unquote, numb the pain and give me some sort of pleasure, spike my dopamine one way or another. And, before I knew it, I found myself fairly obese, probably, I'd say 40, 50 pounds. No, I'd say probably like 40 pounds overweight. And one day I had finally hit that breaking point. I remember that morning, so I went to a local grocery store and got a deli sandwich, some chips, and, had that just while watching like a soccer game or something. And then a few hours later, my parents had come home with some pizza, and, I munched on that. And even though I was already fairly full, I was having them I was just being a glutton. I was just eating for the sake of eating, for the sake of pleasure, and tasting something that tasted good. I remember I was super bloated, and it was like a scary level of bloat that I had never felt before. And that night I went to sleep. It was kind of hard to fall asleep because I was so bloated. And then before I knew it, I was at the toilet puking, and I had to puke like 3 separate times that night, and I kept everyone up, and it was embarrassing. It was really embarrassing. So that was kind of like my rock bottom. My final straw was that, just, I'm robbing everyone of sleep. And it sucked in the moment. I was really frustrated with myself, but that was the final straw. And I remember, the next day having downloading my first food tracking app, and it was called Carb Manager. I don't know if it's still up, but now I either use MyFitnessPal or Chronometer. But the point is, I downloaded that one, Carb Manager, and just started tracking my food. And I tried to stay under a certain amount of calories and stuff like that. And I was fairly brand new to this stuff, but that was like one of the first steps that I took, and where I was like, okay, I need to start seeing what I'm eating and being under a certain limit, under a certain amount of calories and all that. And I remember I went to a baseball game with my friend for my birthday. And, I was out there like still tracking food. We went back to In and Out and, having like the protein style and still tracking and making sure everything fit, restraining myself the whole day to make room for the meals at the game and at In and Out and stuff like that. I remember being on, multiple multi-day fasts. I'd be at car meets with friends and, just thugging it out. Just doing what it took and, letting my friends know too, like, this is what I'm going to do. And luckily they were all supportive. And they respected the commitment. I know for a lot of people, that's one of the big hurdles is getting the family on board or just, being scared of being judged by your family members once you make that change. And, I totally understand. But at the end of the day, it takes what it takes and you've got to do what you've got to do. So if I ever did face resistance, I can think of a few times where there was like some resistance or like some questioning from people. They weren't necessarily close family or friends, but they were people just like within the environment that I was in. But even then it bugged me. It didn't bug me at all, because, I had hit that rock bottom and I just, I used the pain from that low point as motivation, as fuel to stick to my plan and stick to what I was doing. So I think that if you're experiencing something similar right now, you're thinking of starting this journey with self-improvement and improving your health, and that's one of the big resistance points. That's one of the big fears, is that you're going to face resistance from your family and friends. Then I want you to just continue to think about that low point and what it felt at the very bottom. That's something that's going to keep you going and allow you to say, you know what, fuck it. So-and-so's judging. Let them judge. I don't care. I'm going to stick to what I'm doing. And there's pros and cons to hitting those really low moments. Obviously, in the moment, it absolutely sucks. If you get, like I said, a family tragedy is absolutely terrible. You're never going to see that person again. It hurts. And you're wondering why and all these different things. You're going through the grieving process. But, in the end, if you can do something to make the family proud afterwards, it feels really good. So I think if you, went through a breakup or whatever, just tapping into that pain and just thinking of how it felt when you were at rock bottom and maybe you were, eating too much ice cream, eating too much cookies, whatever it is, and you felt terrible with yourself, then, use that as motivation to keep you going and just be like, hey, I'm not going back to that couch. I'm not going back to that low point. I'm a new person now and I want to prove it to myself. And if others see it and respect it, then great. But at the end of the day, you want to prove it to yourself. So definitely those low points, they can be a big blessing in the long run. In the moment, you're, like I said before, you're questioning, why did it happen? Why me? Why me? But then, once the dust settles, then you see, wow, this was really my rock bottom, my lowest point. But in the end, it was like my starting line for, a new race in life, a new competition in life, where you're just continuously improving yourself. And I think it's difficult to make that mindset shift early on, especially when you're still going through it. But, if you are in that phase where you're flirting with the idea of, pushing through and you're thinking, man, what am I going to do right now? Am I going to sink or swim? Then, I hope this helps you make that transition and make that decision to swim. Don't sink. Don't accept defeat. Don't stay down there. Something big that helped me too when I was first making that transition and I would bed rot a little bit was literally just going out to walk with my dog. And if the day before we did a mile, then the next day I'd want to do 1.1 miles. Then the day after that, 1.2. Maybe I'm feeling ambitious one day, and then all of a sudden I go for 1.5 or 2. and just making incremental progress somewhere, somehow. Push-ups and sit-ups, before you shower. Make incremental progress however you feel comfortable, and just keep telling yourself that this is the start of something new for yourself. Incremental progress somehow, some way, when you're at absolute rock bottom, is huge, and it doesn't look like it's going to be something monumental, but over time it adds up, and before you know it, you're in a completely new body. You feel much better. But you got to start somewhere. You got to start with that incremental progress, and just recognizing that rock bottom is the start of something new. That's the mindset shift that helped me, and it's the mindset shift that I've seen help so many other people. And I hope that if you're struggling right now, or maybe you've had some weeks of progress and then you got hit with another form of resistance or something that you could see as a setback, I hope you're tapping into that initial pain that got you started in the first place. If you're at that point where maybe you've had 6, 7, 8 weeks of incremental progress, but all of a sudden you got hit with another obstacle, then it's a test. It's like, okay, you've developed a new mindset, you have these new habits. How strong are you really? How committed are you? Can you continue with those habits and with that same mental approach now that you've been hit with this new obstacle? And you can 100% push through this new obstacle as well. The resistance that you experience at rock bottom is nothing compared to what you experience at that first/second obstacle after rock bottom. It's not the same thing. So, you started the momentum from zero, and, you got the ball rolling. So if you could do that, then you can push through an obstacle once you're a little more advanced and you've already had some weeks under your belt of progress. So, whether it's an injury, a scheduling constraint, a new job, or whatever it is, remind yourself that you already went from 0 to 1, and going from 0 to 1 is much harder than going from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc. So, valuing incremental progress is huge, and not comparing yourself to, another person's journey and seeing where they're at. That's, like they say, comparison is the thief of joy, and it slows a lot of people down. It slows a lot of people down, and you don't want to chase anything. You want to just go take each step rationally and incrementally. And before you know it, like I said, you'll look back and you'll see that you made steady progress the entire time. There was no crazy ups and downs. It was just super steady. And even when you do have a setback, maybe it's a small dip, but then you just keep going up and up and up, nice and steady. And that's what we want. And what keeps you growing steady is, like I said, just valuing the incremental improvement, and, not trying to jump too far ahead, not letting yourself go too far back. That's huge. So anyways, I hope this was really helpful for anyone who is flirting with the idea of, finally taking that first step in the direction of, improving your health and wellness, or anyone who is experiencing some setbacks right now. I just want to recommend that you stay true to the basics, which are incremental progress and just knowing your why. If you already got the ball rolling, you've already done the hardest part. You already did the hardest part, which is going from 0 to 1. And right now, if you're working on going from 0 to 1, then I highly recommend you just start with, like I mentioned before in my journey, those small walks, the small push-up challenges. Maybe you've never even done a push-up in your life. You've always had to do like beginner push-ups from your knees. That's okay. And make that your first goal. Or just, like I said, go on a walk. Start moving forward. I think you've got to start there. That's going to be the best case scenario. If you're going from 0 to 1, get out of bed. Go on a walk. Think about your rock bottom and how you're going to use it as fuel to go from 0 to 1. And before you know it, you're going to be at 1 and working on going from 1 to 2, 2 to 3. But of course, you got to value that incremental progress, small steps. Make sure that you don't willingly take a back step. Of course, like I said, life's going to hit you and it's going to force you to take a back step, but don't let it spin out of control. Don't let a cheat meal turn into a cheat week, etc. So again, I hope this helps. I hope that you can turn your lowest point into a breakthrough and go from 0 to 1 and not get stuck at any point for far too long. Life happens. You're going to have setbacks, but don't willingly take a step back. Don't willingly self-sabotage and just keep pushing forward. Once you're at steps 4 and 5, like I mentioned many times already, it's going to be much easier to go from 4 to 5 than from 0 to 1. So if you're struggling in the middle, just remember that you already went from 0 to 1. You already did the hard work. Going from 0 to 1 is the hardest. So whatever you're dealing with in the middle, you're going to push through it as long as you stick to the basics. And that's forcing incremental progress and just sticking to your why.